I still remember the sound before the silence, the clatter of metals, the low hum of cameras, the way the November air at Arlington bit through my gloves like it wanted to remind me I was still alive. The ceremony was broadcast live Veterans Day 2025, and the seats behind me filled with polished faces, suits, and quiet murmurs. I stood in formation, the uniform pressed sharp against my skin. My stepmother Diane sat in the front row beside my father. She leaned toward him, but her whisper carried farther than she thought. "She'll never be respected in that uniform," she said. The words slid into the open air like a blade hidden in kindness. I didn't move. The boom mic hanging above caught every syllable. One of the camera operators glanced up. He'd heard it too. I kept my eyes forward. In the Army, silence is armor. The master of ceremonies called my name. Captain Reeves stepped to the podium, citation folder in hand. His voice was steady, almost clinical. "For actions under fire during the convoy ambush near Al-Hasaka, Syria, 12th March 2023. The rest blurred into cadence. Words like "under fire, all maintained comm relay," and "guided medevac coordinates with precision under enemy rounds." My stepmother's smile froze halfway through its next curve. The camera panned toward the audience. I saw it flicker in the reflection of the teleprompter, a perfect frame of disbelief. The general approached, silver hair bright against the dull November sky. "Specialist Tessa Monroe," he said, the rank still catching me off guard for wounds sustained in the line of duty, "you are hereby awarded the Purple Heart." The pin touched my chest, cold and deliberate. For a second, the world slowed. The brass pressed against fabric, the soft click of the clasp locking, and then the stillness. 30 seconds of silence filled the grounds. Even the birds stopped. Somewhere behind me, Diane shifted in her seat. The nation was watching, and she had nowhere to hide. I kept my face, calm eyes fixed on the flag, rippling behind the stage. Every humiliation, every cutting remark about my service, every dinner where she called me cute little soldier, melted in that quiet. The crowd stood. Some saluted. Others just held their hands over their hearts. I didn't need to look back to know Diane was staring, realizing the microphone had caught everything she said. I felt the tremor of her embarrassment, like static against my spine. The news cameras zoomed in on the metal glinting under the morning sun. I could almost hear the whispers beginning across living rooms, online streams, church groups. The kind of whispers that change stories, that turn gossip into consequence. Respect wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It stood when others sat. The ceremony closed with the anthem. I sang under my breath, not for anyone watching, but for the convoy that never made it back. When it ended, the reporters crowded near the steps, asking about courage, duty, sacrifice. I smiled, gave the same line we all learn early. We just do our job. But when I caught the reflection in a camera lens, Diane was still sitting small now, hands clutching her purse, like it was the only thing left that could protect her. I nodded slightly, a silent salute, not of forgiveness, but of finality. She wanted to break me in private. Life made sure her lesson was public. That night, the clip replayed on half a dozen channels, the caption, "Simple Stepdaughter Honored for Valor," after surviving Syrian ambush. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, her voice caught by the mic, "You'll never be respected in that uniform." Millions heard it. I didn't have to say a word. The internet did the rest. I watched it once, then closed my laptop. The metal on my table caught the lamplight. I traced its edge with my thumb and thought, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a broadcast. Sometimes it's a breath. The first time I realized Diane would never see me as family was not during a fight. It was during dinner. My father had remarried when I was 20. I had been in the Army less than 2 years, then still learning to fold my uniform tight enough to fit regulations, still believing home was a place I could come back to. Diane arrived with her perfect hair and perfect sentences. She made people feel small while smiling. Her son Kyle was 27 and jobless, but called himself a founder of a tech startup. He spent his days at coffee shops talking about investors that never existed. My father, retired construction manager, looked tired but proud to have a woman like her beside him. I tried to fit into the frame they created. On the surface, we looked like a family. Underneath, there was static. That night at dinner, Diane reached across the table and adjusted my collar. "Cute uniform," she said with a laugh that made the room follow. My father smiled weakly. I pretended not to hear it. The laughter echoed against the silverware. I had been home less than 6 hours and already counted the number of ways she reminded me I was out of place. The next Sunday at church, she waved at neighbors and whispered, "She plays soldier on computers." The women beside her nodded in approval. I stood by the door, hands folded behind my back, remembering my last 12-hour shift at Fort Liberty. Play soldier was a good one. I had spent that week checking ComSec codes and fixing a SyncGARS unit that had failed mid-exercise. But I let it slide. In toxic families, silence is survival. At the grocery store, she delivered her third strike. A woman from church greeted me. "So proud of what you do." Before I could answer, Diane said loudly, "Real soldiers deploy. She just keeps schedules." The woman blinked, confused, smiled politely, and walked away. I watched her retreat down the aisle, the air smelling faintly of detergent and something sour. That was the moment I knew it was deliberate. The pattern wasn't accidental, it was performance. She needed an audience. My father avoided my eyes every time it happened. He called it tension. I called it training. The Army teaches you to absorb noise and move on, but it still stung. When I returned to base, I felt lighter. There was comfort and roll call in the sound of boots on gravel in the 0530 air that smelled like metal and dirt. Real soldiers don't need approval. We need signal clarity. The talk was busy that week. I checked radio traffic, logged frequencies, answered to Echo 6. It felt cleaner than home. Then Diane called. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Honey, Kyle's trying to build his business, but the bank needs a co-signer. It's just a formality." I said no before she finished. She went silent, then sighed like disappointment was oxygen. "Family first right," she said. The guilt landed exactly where she wanted. For a second, I almost apologized. Then I remembered the laughter over dinner, the whisper in church, the voice in the grocery store. "No," I said. "Family last this time." I could almost hear her smile freezing. She ended the call quickly. That night, I ran 2 miles extra after PT. Each step felt like erasing another apology I didn't owe. A week later, during another family dinner, she tried again. "Kyle's still waiting for your answer," she said, cutting her steak like it was the problem. I looked across the table. I thought he was an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs find investors. My father coughed into his napkin. Kyle pretended to check his phone. Diane smiled tight. Investors prefer families that stand together. I reached into my bag and slid a folded brochure across the table. It was from the local credit union. On the front, bold letters read, "Managing Debt Responsibly." "Maybe this can help with Kyle's business plan," I said. The silence that followed was delicious. Her eyes flickered to the paper, then back to me. "You think you're funny?" she said softly. I smiled. "No, ma'am, just responsible." It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming air after months of holding my breath. The next morning before dawn, I was back at Fort Liberty. The base was waking up, lights flickering through the fog. The cadence of boots echoed across the quad. Inside the talk, the radios hissed alive. I ran a ComSec check, updated the duty roster, and logged the morning roll call. The discipline steadied me. I was part of something that worked because rules mattered. Back home, rules were flexible. Respect was a currency Diane spent on herself. On base, it was earned. At noon, I got a text from my father. "Try to keep the peace," he wrote. That phrase had become his shield for everything. Keep the peace. Ignore the disrespect. Smile through the storm. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Peace wasn't free. Someone always paid for it. In our family, it had always been me. Later that week, one of my sergeants joked that I looked too serious for a 26-year-old. I laughed, said I was practicing for civilian life. The truth was, I had learned seriousness at home. Diane had been the instructor. When I finally turned off my phone that night, the barracks were quiet except for the distant hum of a generator. I lay on my bunk and thought of her phrase again. Family first. It sounded noble until you realized who got to define family. For people like Diane, family meant obedience, not loyalty. It meant funding her son's fantasy and smiling through every insult. I wasn't playing that game anymore. Somewhere between the static of the radios and the click of the nightlight, I understood the first lesson of real respect. You can't earn it from people who need you small. You just stop asking. Memorial Day in Richmond was supposed to be about remembrance. Not appearances, but Diane made everything about image. I drove from Fort Liberty that morning, still in uniform, the pressed fabric stiff from inspection. When I pulled into the church parking lot, Diane waved from the steps and pointed toward the far end. "Park back there, Tessa. Don't make a scene with that outfit," she said. Her voice carried just enough for others to hear. I parked where she told me, past the dumpsters, the gravel crunching under my boots. Inside, people greeted her with smiles. "So lovely to see you, Diane." She nodded graciously, introducing herself as the wife of a veteran, as if that title gave her the right to speak for everyone who'd ever served. When she introduced me, her smile tightened. "This is my stepdaughter. She works in communications for the Army." She said the word communications dripping with irony. Someone asked if I was deployed overseas. Diane answered before I could. "No, she mostly handles computer stuff, not the dangerous kind." A few chuckled politely. It was a familiar humiliation, quiet and public all at once. I stood straighter. "Radio operations," I said calmly. "We handle all traffic during live missions." The group nodded, unsure how to respond. Diane's hand brushed my arm. "Don't embarrass us, dear. Real service isn't behind a keyboard." The laughter this time wasn't polite. It was real. I felt my ears burn. The smell of polished wood and old candles filled the air. My father pretended to adjust his tie. He always did that when he didn't want to choose sides. Later after the service, Diane lingered by the courtyard with 2 women from her charity club. I heard her say, "We're lucky to have someone generous in the family. Kyle's business would have never started without that support." I froze. Generous in the family. It hit me like a delayed echo. She was talking about money, not manners. Kyle had never earned enough to pay for anything, which meant only one thing. Someone had used my name. I didn't confront her then. I wanted to be sure. At dinner that night, the air in their house smelled of lemon cleaner and tension. The perfect family sat in perfect silence until Diane began Kyle's really making progress. Investors are impressed. My father nodded like he understood. "Tessa, maybe you could give him some advice on leadership," Diane added sweetly. Kyle looked up. "Actually, could I borrow your car next weekend? I've got a meeting in Norfolk. My car's registered on base," I said. "Can't be used for personal trips." Diane sighed, disappointed. "You know, family helps each other." I smiled. "Then Kyle should help with gas next time he borrows Dad's." My father shifted uncomfortably. Dinner turned into an audit: who paid what, who owed whom, who remembered what promise. Kyle spoke about expanding operations using phrases like bridge funding and angel investor. Diane glowed with pride. I kept my face neutral while my mind turned over the words she'd said at church. Generous in the family. After dessert, I excused myself, saying I needed to check my deployment notice. It wasn't a lie. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop. The pre-deployment checklist was waiting. Equipment review, vaccinations, family contact updates. I typed through each field methodically. The rhythm of military paperwork calmed me. Nothing was ambiguous here. Every item had proof. Every form had accountability. In families like mine, accountability was optional. I clicked through my credit report out of habit. My breath caught when I saw it. A new inquiry. Approved under my name. Credit card company I didn't recognize. Limit 10,000. My pulse steadied even as my stomach twisted. They had used my information. Maybe Diane, maybe Kyle, maybe both. The betrayal felt cold, not hot. I took a screenshot and filed it under family accounts. The next morning, I reported for duty. The base was alive with movement soldiers hauling equipment, radios crackling with check-ins. Sergeant Lane tossed me a clipboard. Deployment window confirmed, he said. You'll be comms relay for the convoy unit. Copy that, I said. The hum of machines filled the air, grounding me in something real. I reviewed the signal relay protocols and tested the emergency beacon line. Between tasks, I checked my phone. Another text from my father. Your stepmother says there's confusion about finances. Don't overreact. That word was his favorite excuse for other people's lies. I didn't reply. At lunch, I drafted a short email to the credit company requesting verification of the application. No anger, just clarity. The same way I handled a broken relay, find the source, isolate the fault. That night, Diane sent a message. Kyle didn't mean to trouble you. He just thought you'd understand how hard it is to start something from nothing. I stared at the screen and typed, he started it with my name. I didn't hit send. Not yet. Revenge requires patience. It's like aligning frequencies. You wait for the exact signal before you transmit. 2 days later, Diane posted on Facebook a photo of Kyle with a caption, "Proud of my son building his dream. None of it would be possible without the family's faith in him." Faith. Another word for someone else's credit line. I didn't comment. Instead, I sent Kyle a message with a link to a local vocational program. Forklift certification course, solid pay, real job opportunities. I added a thumbs up emoji. No words. Just the quiet sting of humor wrapped in practicality. He saw it and left it on read. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can send. At work the next morning, I printed my deployment notice and folded it into my notebook. Syria, tentative date, January 2023. I ran another ComSec check, logged the frequencies, and stared at the screen until my reflection blurred in the glass. I thought of Diane's voice again at the church, her laughter blending with the sound of hymnals. Every word had been a brick, and I had been helping her build the wall she hid behind. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was preparing coordinates. Betrayal was a map. I was just learning how to read it. By mid-July, the messages started coming in waves. Diane first, always polite on the surface. "If you respected us, you'd help your brother," she wrote. No greeting, no question, just an accusation dressed as advice. I stared at the words on my phone, feeling the same pressure I used to feel under command when a superior gave an impossible order. Only this time, it wasn't duty, it was manipulation. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, my father texted, "Keep the peace, Tess. It's not worth fighting about money." He never asked what had happened. He never did. His role had always been the negotiator, the man who mistook surrender for balance. That night, I logged off the network at the talk, walked outside, and let the humidity wrap around me. The base lights glowed through the mist. I could almost hear Diane's voice under the hum of generators. "Keep the peace. Help your brother. Family first." Those words had become their doctrine. The next morning, Kyle posted a photo of himself standing beside a rented truck with the caption, "Building dreams, not excuses." Underneath, someone commented, "Your sister in the Army must be proud." Kyle replied, "Some soldiers can't even lift a box." The laughter emojis stacked up like bullet holes. I saw it at 600 during radio check. One of my teammates, Rivera, looked over my shoulder. "That's your brother," I nodded. He frowned. "He's lucky you don't have artillery clearance." I laughed, but it came out hollow. That day I buried myself in work. We were running SyncGAR's comm checks, practicing relays for convoy simulations. The chatter over the headset was comforting. No lies, no half-truths, just static and signal. I ran diagnostics, logged frequencies, and finished an after-action review draft for the training officer. The discipline steadied me even as my phone buzzed in my pocket again. Diane this time with a new line. I heard from the bank. They said there were questions about your account. Did you authorize something? The phrasing made my stomach twist. Questions about my account. I opened my email during lunch. There it was, A notification from a credit company I'd never applied to. We're reviewing your recent application. Please confirm details. The date matched the week Diane had mentioned generosity at church. My hands went cold. They hadn't just borrowed my name for reputation, they had used it for money. I scrolled down and saw the fine print signature required, a digital copy attached. My signature, or rather a version of it. Slightly off, but close enough that an untrained eye wouldn't notice. I sat there surrounded by soldiers laughing over sandwiches, while my pulse beat steady against the realization. This wasn't a mistake. It was theft wrapped in family language. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Revenge, like comms, required coordination. That night, I filed a fraud alert and froze all credit accounts tied to my name. No drama, no calls, no confrontation, just data and verification. The process felt clean, mechanical. I uploaded proof-confirmed verification questions and received the confirmation page. Credit freeze confirmed. The phrase felt like a medal, my version of the Purple Heart for emotional warfare. I took a selfie with the screen, the glow of the monitor reflecting off my uniform. Then I sent it to Kyle with a simple smiling sticker. No words. Within minutes, the scene mark appeared, followed by silence. I pictured him trying to apply for another loan, watching the system reject his request in real time. It wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. The next day, Diane called. "Sweetheart, the bank said something about a freeze. That's affecting the family account." I kept my tone professional. "That's correct. It's called protecting your identity. You should try it." She hesitated, then switched tactics. "You know how hard Kyle's been working. He just needs a little help until his deal closes." I almost laughed. "Which deal? The one funded with my signature?" Her voice sharpened. "You're imagining things." Gaslighting was her favorite game. I'd played it long enough to know the rules. "Then you won't mind if I forward the email to you," I said. "You can tell me if it looks real." She hung up before I could finish. Later, my father called. "You shouldn't push her, Tess. She's under stress." I wanted to ask when exactly Diane wasn't under stress, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Dad, someone forged my name." He paused. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." That was his signature phrase, as if denial could fix anything. I ended the call and went back to work. The radio crackled with an incoming test. Echo 6, confirm link. I pressed transmit. Link, solid copy traffic. My voice was steady, detached. It was easier to hold a frequency than hold a family together. That night, I filled out a full incident report, not for the Army, but for myself. I listed every transaction tied to them, every payment, every favor. It read like an operational log of betrayal. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Rivera handed me a printout of the AAR I'd written. "Good detail," he said. "You'd make a hell of a comms officer." I smiled faintly. I've had practice. He didn't ask what I meant. Later that afternoon during shift change, I saw a new post from Kyle, a quote about loyalty. "Family means helping each other even when it's inconvenient." The comments poured in sympathy and validation. I didn't respond. I was done playing their version of family. That evening, I ordered a new lock for my mailbox and closed every shared online account I could find. Streaming subscriptions, utilities, even the family plan on our phone service. Small revenges all clean. When Diane texted the internet's not working. "Did something happen to the plan?" I replied. "Yes. It's called independence. No emojis this time. Just clarity." The next Sunday, my father left a voicemail. "You know, you could have just talked to us." I listened twice trying to find the place where he sounded like a parent. It wasn't there. In toxic families, every confrontation becomes your fault for speaking. I had stopped defending myself. I was documenting every insult, every transaction, every manipulation. Revenge wasn't rage anymore. It was data integrity. By the end of that month, I had built a folder labeled Family Archive. Inside were emails, bank statements, screenshots, and the digital signature that almost cost me $10,000. I saved it to an encrypted drive and closed the lid. Outside the base, quieted as the last shift ended. The sky was streaked with purple, and the air smelled faintly of burnt fuel and pine. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of Diane or Kyle. I felt precision, cold, deliberate precision. They had taught me chaos. The army had taught me order. Now I was using both. The desert always sounded the same before a convoy rolled out the low rumble of engines layered under static radio chatter, the kind of rhythm you only notice when you have been there too long. Syria, March 2023. I sat in the back of the command truck headset, tight call sign, Echo 6, responsible for the relay net between 3 vehicles and the forward unit. The sun had not yet burned through the dust, and everything smelled like fuel and metal. We were moving supplies north of Al-Hasaka. I had checked the SyncGAR's frequencies, twice triple confirmed encryption keys. Routine. Until it wasn't. 20 minutes into the route, the first explosion tore through the ground ahead. The shockwave hit like a hammer. I ducked instinctively, the truck jerking sideways. IED grid 2893-4E142. I shouted into the mic, my voice steady despite the ringing in my ears. The driver yelled for direction. I switched frequencies, patched through to command, and transmitted the 9 line for medevac. The second blast came closer. Debris rained against the windshield. I smelled smoke and something metallic. A fragment tore through the side panel, grazing my left shoulder. Heat and numbness followed. I held pressure with one hand, kept transmitting with the other. Echo 6, link solid, I repeated. The response came clear. Copy maintain. Relay. Minutes stretched into hours, then silence. When the dust settled, 2 trucks were hit, 3 wounded, no fatalities. The medevac pilot confirmed the extraction. They said I had stayed online the entire time, never dropping comms. That detail would end up in the citation later. At the time, it just felt like doing my job. The medics bandaged my shoulder and tagged me for medical observation. Fragment wound, non-penetrating, left scapular region, the report read. It looked cleaner on paper. They moved me to a Casevac line, then to base hospital. The air smelled of antiseptic and diesel. I was alive, wired up, but my left arm ached like it belonged to someone else. I stayed quiet, replaying the sequence again and again. On the 4th day, I called my father. Diane answered. "You sound dramatic," she said when I told her I'd been injured. "Was it even dangerous where you were?" I stared at the hospital ceiling. There was an ambush. She laughed softly. "Oh, sweetheart, they always say that on the news." I ended the call. Later that week, a photo from the base circulated online, one of me with the sling and headset still around my neck. Diane posted under it from her own account, so proud of our girl, even if it was just a comms exercise. The words hit harder than the shrapnel. The next day, she joined a private family chat and sent a meme. A soldier sitting behind a laptop captioned, "Frontline hero typing hard." My cousins reacted with laughing emojis. Someone else added, "She probably staged it for attention." The image spread quietly. I didn't reply. I saved every screenshot, every comment, every timestamp. Evidence, not anger. In toxic families, you learn to collect proof instead of apologies. A month later, I was discharged to rehab stateside. The hospital in Richmond was quiet, the halls lined with faded flags. Physical therapy hurt more than I expected. The muscles near the wound tightened like wire. My therapist told me to be patient. Nerves heal slower than pride, she said. I smiled, though I wasn't sure which one she meant. Diane called once. "How's the arm?" she asked. "Getting better." "Good," she said. "Since you're not deploying, could you help me pick out a gift for the church raffle? Something nice. Maybe that luxury brand you like." I paused. "You want me to buy it? You still have that military discount, right?" I almost laughed. I pictured her standing in her kitchen polishing her image while I couldn't even lift a mug without pain. "No," I said finally. "Buy it yourself." She huffed. "You know, for someone who claims to serve, you're not very generous." That night, I stared at my sling resting on the chair. The edges of the bandage had turned faintly pink from sweat. I reached for my phone and opened the chat folder where I kept the screenshots. Every cruel message, every dismissal, every time she had tried to erase what I had done. Betrayal had a texture now. It was digital. I thought about posting everything, tagging each of them, but stopped. Revenge wasn't exposure. It was timing. 2 months later, the unit submitted my name for commendation. The paperwork mentioned composure under fire and sustained communication during active engagement. When Diane heard, she sent a text that said, "I saw the email. Are you sure it's not just standard procedure?" They hand those out like candy. I read it 3 times. She was terrified of losing control of the narrative. I let her believe whatever made her feel safe. I focused on recovery, on stretching the arm, inch by inch, until the scar tissue loosened. My commanding officer visited once, bringing coffee and a small note from the convoy team. It just said, "We heard every word." That meant more than any medal. After the visit, I went for a short walk outside. The sunlight felt heavier than I remembered. I checked my messages again. Another group post from Diane. "Our brave soldier is back home. Thank God for keeping her safe during her admin work." The comments were full of hearts and prayers. No one asked what admin work meant. I didn't correct them. The people who mattered already knew. I scrolled past another meme, a new one this time. A fake purple heart photoshopped onto a cat, captioned, "When you survive paperwork." Family betrayal looked ridiculous when printed in pixels. I took a screenshot, saved it under a new folder labeled Phase 2. If they wanted to mock sacrifice, they would learn what silence could do when it turned into evidence. Revenge didn't need a gun. It needed patience and proof. That night, I set the phone face down and stared at the faint scars along my shoulder. Pain was just information. The body's way of recording what the heart already knew. The nightmares started slow. At first, it was only sound, the low whirl of a rotor slicing through wind, the metallic scream of static over comms, the faint click of a transmitter that never answered back. Then came the smell, antiseptic mixed with dust and blood. I would wake in the barracks before dawn, the sheets damp with sweat, the ceiling fan turning lazy circles like it was timing my breaths. The barracks at Fort Liberty were quiet at that hour, a row of muted lights, the scent of coffee from someone pulling early duty. I sat on the edge of the bunk, pressing my hand against the scar on my shoulder until the tremor passed. That morning, I checked my email before formation. The new message sat at the top of my inbox. Subject line, "Stop pretending you served." It was from Diane. No greeting, no context, just those 5 words. The air felt colder. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. There was nothing to say. Pretending. That was her gift. She could rewrite reality until people clapped for the performance. I went through PT like a machine. Push-ups, sprints, cool down. My body obeyed while my mind drifted somewhere darker. After breakfast, I stopped by legal to deliver a report for the comms unit. Rivera, my friend from JAG, looked up from her desk. She saw my face and frowned. "You look like someone just called you out on national television." I slid my phone across the table, the email open. She read it quietly, then met my eyes. "You need to start documenting everything." I laughed softly. "I already have folders." "Good," she said. "Then add boundaries." I raised an eyebrow. "Boundaries, yes," she said. "You don't owe them explanations. Just documentation and distance." I nodded, though part of me still ached. Families aren't supposed to need boundaries, but some do. That afternoon during briefing, the company commander announced pending commendations. I heard my name, Specialist Monroe, Purple Heart recommendation, confirmed pending review. There was polite applause. Someone patted my back. I smiled because it was easier than explaining that I didn't plan to invite anyone to the ceremony. When the form came for next of kin notification, I left the box blank. It felt final in a way that was both sad and freeing. That night, I video called Rivera. "You really won't invite them?" she asked. "No," I said. "They've already written their version of me. They don't need the real one." She tilted her head. "Then what do you need peace?" I said. She nodded. "Then keep your distance until peace sounds like silence." I thought about her words later, sitting alone in the barracks common room. The hum of vending machines and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights filled the silence. I could live with that kind of noise. A few days later, my father called from an unknown number. "Hey, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Don't tell Diane I called." I almost smiled. "What's going on, Dad?" "She's been upset since that thing online. I just wanted to hear your voice. You could have done that before I said." He sighed. "I know." "Listen, do you still have that Costco card? They won't let me in without one, and it's awkward with her." I stared at the phone, trying not to laugh. It was absurd. My father was sneaking around grocery memberships to avoid his wife. "Dad," I said carefully, "you can get your own card. It's $20. "I just thought it'd be easier," he muttered. "You're always organized." I pictured him whispering in the car outside the store. Diane inside, pretending everything was fine. It was almost tragic comedy. "I'll text you the link," I said, "but the card's canceled. You'll need your own." He hesitated, then said softly, "You've changed." "No," I said. "I just stopped paying for other people's convenience." When we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the wall. Somewhere between pity and anger was a place called Clarity. That's where I live now. Later that week, I spent an evening going through my financial accounts. Every recurring payment tied to Diane's household went on the chopping block. The old utilities, the shared phone plan, even the cloud storage that Kyle used for his fake business documents. Click, cancel, confirm. Each button pressed felt like a line drawn in sand. I changed passwords, deleted shared access, and set up two-factor verification on everything. Quiet actions, no announcements, just structure, replacing chaos. When I finished, I leaned back and let out a long breath. The hum of the base generators filled the air, steady and predictable. It felt like the first sound of safety. Rivera texted me later that night. "Boundaries built," yet I sent back a photo of my screen, the notification reading, "Account access removed." She replied with a single word, "Progress." The next morning, Diane called twice. I didn't answer. Then came a message, short and sharp. "We can't log into the account." "What did you do?" I stared at it for a long moment before typing. "Nothing you can undo." I set the phone face down and went outside. The air was thick with early summer heat, cicadas buzzing through the trees near the barracks. Somewhere behind me, laughter echoed from the rec yard. For a second, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the absence of dread. That counted. I realized that my breaking point hadn't been the betrayal or the laughter or even the forged signature. It was the moment I understood that silence could either trap you or free you. It depended on who owned it. From now on, mine was armor. When I returned to my room, I wrote in my journal the same line over and over until the ink bled through the paper. No more fixing, no more funding, no more defending, just truth written down quietly enough to last. The morning at Arlington smelled of wet stone and pine. A soft mist clung to the marble rows as the crowd gathered near the stage. Veterans Day, November 2025. The air had that quiet gravity that only sacred ground carries. I stood among other soldiers in pressed uniforms, our boots aligned on the pathway that cut through the grass. My name had been called the night before. Purple Heart ceremony to be broadcast live. I had told no one, but somehow Diane found out. She arrived in a beige coat with pearl buttons, her hair perfectly curled, my father trailing behind like an afterthought. I could feel her eyes on me before I saw her. She moved toward the reserved seating and leaned in close to one of the organizers. "We're her family," she said, voice syrupy but sharp. They let her sit in the second row. I stayed still, spine straight. The morning wind pressed against my collar. Somewhere above, a camera boom. Swung gently, red light blinking. A reporter murmured about live coverage, voice crisp through the static of the mic. As the national anthem faded, a pause fell across the crowd. The chaplain stepped forward, offering a brief prayer. Then the announcer began calling names, each one, followed by applause. I listened without emotion, palms pressed together, breathing steady. Then it came. Specialist Tessa Monroe. My cue. I stepped toward the podium, every movement measured. As I passed the front row, Diane shifted in her seat and whispered to my father, "She'll never be respected in that uniform." The microphone hanging overhead caught every syllable. I saw the red recording light flare brighter. My heartbeat didn't change. Years in uniform had trained me to keep rhythm under pressure. The Master of Ceremonies continued oblivious. For wounds sustained in combat during operations in northern Syria, Specialist Monroe demonstrated exemplary composure and communication integrity under fire. The general beside him unfolded a paper, the citation, trembling slightly in the wind. His voice carried through the speakers. During a convoy ambush near Al-Hasaka, Monroe maintained uninterrupted communication relay despite direct enemy contact, enabling the successful extraction of 3 wounded personnel. Her actions directly contributed to the preservation of life and mission continuity. The words echoed across the open field. The cameras zoomed in. Faces in the crowd turned toward me. The general looked up, nodded once, and lifted the medal. I bowed my head as the cold metal touched my chest. The pin caught against the fabric for a second before locking into place. A simple click. Small sound, enormous weight. Applause rose slowly at first, then swelled. The sound rolled across the lawn, powerful and endless. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Diane. Her face was pale, eyes wide, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth. The camera caught her reaction, a perfect portrait of disbelief. She realized then that her whisper had not been private. I didn't look long. I turned toward the flag behind the stage. The red, white, and blue shifted gently in the wind. I raised my hand in salute, the metal glinting under the gray morning light. For a moment the noise faded, replaced by the steady hum of memory. The convoy, the radio, the voices calling through static, the smell of smoke. I felt everything and nothing at once. The general lowered his hand first, signaling the end of the salute. I stepped back, returning to my place among the others. The ceremony continued, but the air had changed. Reporters whispered to each other, checking their feeds. I knew what they had heard. The mic had been live the entire time. Diane's words were already on record, carried through every broadcast speaker across the field. Justice didn't always shout. Sometimes it simply echoed. When the final salute ended, the announcer called for a moment of silence. The crowd stood as one. Even the smallest children grew still. The only sound was the wind brushing through the trees. 30 seconds stretched into forever. I felt peace settle into my bones. Not the loud kind that demanded attention, but the quiet kind earned through endurance. When the command broke, people began to clap again. I turned slightly, letting my gaze pass over the crowd. Diane sat motionless, my father staring straight ahead, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. The applause swelled again, and for the first time I didn't feel small in front of them. I felt whole. After the ceremony, a young reporter approached me. "How does it feel to be honored publicly after such a dangerous mission?" she asked. I smiled politely. "It feels like duty was done." She nodded, waiting for more, but I gave her nothing else. The cameras wanted words. I offered silence. It was enough. I walked past Diane on my way to the parking area. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes darted toward the camera crews packing up nearby. I stopped just long enough for her to think I might say something. Instead, I straightened my jacket and looked toward the flag again. "Justice doesn't need hate," I said quietly. "It just needs the truth." Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the rustle of people dispersing, the murmur of voices recounting what they had just witnessed. The whisper that had been meant to wound me was now public record tied to the footage of a medal ceremony broadcast nationwide. By the time I reached my car, I could already imagine the replay running on evening news loops, the general's speech, the applause, the wide shot of the crowd, and in the middle of it all, Diane's voice caught by the microphone. I drove out of Arlington slowly, the streets lined with flags fluttering against the cold wind. My shoulder ached, but the pain felt distant, almost useful. It reminded me that survival isn't just physical, it's moral. As I merged onto the highway, I glanced at the metal resting against my chest. Its surface caught the morning light like a signal. Quiet, unflinching, complete. By Monday morning, the clip had reached every corner of the internet. Someone had uploaded the Veterans Day broadcast with subtitles highlighting Diane's whisper and my name underneath. The caption read, "Hot mic humiliation at Arlington." Within hours, it spread through social media like wildfire. The local news covered it next, calling it an unfortunate family moment caught live. I didn't watch the full version, but I heard enough to know it was everywhere. The comments were merciless. Some called Diane heartless. Others defended me with lines like, "That woman deserves every ounce of respect." For the first time, the truth didn't need my voice to be heard. It spoke for itself. By Wednesday, the church where Diane served as head of fundraising released a statement asking her to step back temporarily to maintain community harmony. The wording was diplomatic, but everyone knew what it meant. My father tried calling. I let it ring out. The next morning, 3 messages arrived from old neighbors and distant cousins. Each began the same way, "I'm sorry." One woman from church even wrote, "We didn't know what she was really like." I didn't reply to any of them. The silence worked better. It left them wondering whether I'd forgiven or simply moved on. Rivera called that afternoon. I saw the clip. She said, half amused, half proud, "Guess you don't need a courtroom for justice." "Justice has better lighting now," I said. She laughed. "Still, there's something we need to handle. That meme circulating the fake metal one counts as defamation under your name. We can send a formal warning." I nodded. "Do it." Within a day, Rivera drafted a letter from JAG's Civilian Liaison Office citing misuse of military imagery and reputational harm. She CC'd Diane and Kyle. The subject line was clear: legal notice, digital defamation, and false representation. The email tone was neutral but cold. I didn't have to say a word. The message spoke in legal language sharper than anger ever could. By the next evening, the posts vanished. Diane replaced her profile picture with a Bible verse. Kyle deleted his entire account. Then the apologies came not through calls, but emails. Diane's was first. "We never meant harm," she wrote. "People misunderstood. Can we meet and clarify before lawyers get involved?" The guilt was as performative as always. Kyle followed with his own. "Didn't realize it would blow up like that. I'll take responsibility." I forwarded both to Rivera without comment. She sent a short reply to them on my behalf, acknowledged. Actions speak louder than apologies. A week later, a bank alert popped up on my phone. Another attempt to open a credit line under my name flagged automatically thanks to the freeze. The system blocked it immediately. The report showed a matching IP address from Richmond. I didn't need to guess. I called Rivera again. "Can you confirm that still counts as fraud even if they failed?" "Absolutely," she said. "You've already got your alert logs. We'll attach it to the previous file. It's airtight." I smiled for the first time that week. Revenge wasn't about punishment anymore. It was precision, one documented fact at a time. Diane tried again later that night, this time through my father's number. "Your stepmother is devastated," he said softly. "She's crying every day." "That's between her and her reflection," I said. "You don't understand," he murmured. "This whole thing is tearing us apart." "Then maybe it needed to," I replied. He sighed, defeated. "You've changed." "No," I said quietly. "I've just stopped pretending your peace was worth my pain." The call ended without goodbye. 2 days later, Rivera sent a final summary of the legal exchange. "They've agreed to retract everything formally she said. No court needed. You want a copy for your records?" "Keep it," I said. "I already have enough proof." Outside, the winter air carried a chill sharp enough to wake the senses. I watched the last leaves scrape across the asphalt near the barracks and thought about how endings never come with fanfare. They arrive quietly, like balance being restored. Still, the universe had a sense of humor. The next message came from Kyle. "Hey sis," it began. "Can you do me a small favor? I'm trying to apply for a business grant, and the system says my credit is locked. Can you unfreeze it for a few hours?" I stared at the screen, half disbelieving, half entertained. The audacity was almost admirable. I scrolled through my photos until I found one from months ago, the screenshot of my credit freeze confirmation glowing blue on the laptop screen. I sent it to him with a single sticker, a smiling face wearing sunglasses. No words, just a message loud enough to travel through silence. He didn't reply. I imagined him staring at it, realizing that the sister he mocked no longer existed in the form he could manipulate. The control was gone. Later that week, news reached me that Diane's position at the church had officially been reassigned. "Irreconcilable differences with community values," the notice read. The irony almost made me laugh. She had spent years crafting the image of moral perfection, and one whispered sentence had undone it all. Sometimes justice doesn't need a trial, it just needs an audience. At the end of the month, a few fellow soldiers found the viral clip and sent it around during mess hall. "That your stepmom?" one of them asked. I nodded. "She learned about hot mics the hard way," I said. They laughed, not cruelly, just with the understanding that every soldier has battles no one sees. I joined in the sound foreign, but welcome. Later that night, I wrote a short note in my journal. Boundaries held, truth documented, consequences delivered. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, a habit drilled from years of radio logging. Rivera texted again before lights out. "You good?" I replied. "Better than good. I'm done." She sent back one word, "finally." As I turned off the light, I felt the silence settle around me, not as emptiness, but as closure. For the first time, it belonged to me. The day she showed up at the gate, the sky was gray enough to match her expression. I was returning from morning PT when the guard called my name. "Ma'am, someone's asking for you. Says she's family." I walked toward the checkpoint and saw Diane standing just outside the fence, her coat wrinkled. Makeup washed out by cold wind. My father waited in the car behind her, his hands gripping the steering wheel. She looked smaller than I remembered. "Tessa," she called, voice trembling. "We need to talk." I kept a measured distance. "You're not cleared for entry." She pressed closer to the fence. "Please, just a few minutes. Family is all we have left." I almost smiled at that. "Family," I said quietly, "is the one who catches the signal when the radio cuts out." "You never listened." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Kyle's in trouble," she said finally. "The bank's calling about the credit cards. They said his name's tied to fraud alerts. He could face charges. Can you help him?" The desperation in her tone was real this time, not rehearsed. I studied her for a moment, the woman who had once told an entire congregation that I played soldier. The same woman who laughed at my injuries and turned my service into gossip. Help him, how, I asked. Maybe co-sign something temporary or write a letter for the bank. I let the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. "No," I said. The word was calm, solid. She blinked as if she hadn't heard. "What no?" I repeated. "I don't co-sign other people's mistakes." I turned slightly, nodding to the guard that we were done, but she reached out her fingers, gripping the chain link. "He's your brother," she said. "Stepbrother," I corrected, "and every step has been away from accountability." She flinched. My father climbed out of the car and walked closer. His voice was tired. "She's right, Diane. We did this to ourselves." She glared at him, then back at me. "You can't just stand there and watch us fall apart." "I can," I said softly, "because I already did once." The guard called time, reminding her she needed to leave. She hesitated, then backed away, eyes wet but still calculating. "If you ever loved this family," she began. I cut her off. "Love doesn't mean financing the same disaster twice." I walked back toward the gate. Behind me, her voice cracked. "Please, Tessa, I'm begging you." I didn't turn. Some moments lose their power when you stop giving them attention. That evening, I printed a small packet of documents from my office. a list of free financial counseling centers, job placement programs, and debt relief hotlines. I mailed it to their address with a sticky note that said, "Practical help, not pity." That was the clean version of revenge. No threats, no anger, just truth arranged neatly in an envelope. 2 weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Diane had been asked not to attend church events for a while. Apparently, one of the parish members had approached the pastor with questions about the hot mic incident. They said it reflected poorly on her leadership. I hadn't said anything publicly. I didn't need to. But I did meet with the pastor privately when he reached out. Over coffee, he asked, "What really happened that day?" I told him the story simply, without malice. "She said something cruel," I explained. "The mic picked it up. That's all." He nodded slowly. "She mentioned you refused to reconcile. Forgiveness is private," I said, "but accountability can be public." He sighed, understanding more than I expected. The following Sunday, Diane's name was quietly removed from the bulletin board of committee heads. No announcement, just absence. Sometimes erasure is the most elegant justice. A month later, my father called again. His voice was quieter now, the arrogance gone. "Tess, there's something I should have told you." I didn't speak, letting him fill the silence. "Diane used your name to raise donations a while back. Said you were coming home from deployment and that the family was organizing care packages for other soldiers. She kept the leftover money." I didn't stop her. The confession landed like cold water. I had suspected similar things, but hearing it confirmed the pattern. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because people found out," he said. "Someone compared bank statements. The community's furious. Then you'll finally know how it feels to lose reputation. You didn't earn," I said. He didn't argue. "She's broken, Tess. I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I said. "You live with it." After the call, I sat by my window watching the lights of the base fade into dusk. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was symmetry. Every lie had found its mirror, every insult its echo. Later that week, a box arrived at my door. No note, just an old photo album. Inside were pictures from my childhood, the kind Diane used to hide when guests came over because they didn't match the decor. On the last page, someone had written in shaky pen, "We're sorry." I closed it and placed it in a drawer. Some apologies aren't meant to be displayed. The next day, Kyle sent an email. "I'm trying to get back on track," he wrote. "Found a warehouse job. It's hard but honest. I'm done with shortcuts." I read it twice before replying. "Good," I wrote. "That's what adults do." He didn't respond, but the message stayed marked as read. That was enough. Rivera called later, laughing. "You really mailed them counseling pamphlets with postage," I said. "Professional courtesy. You're ruthless in the quietest way," she said. "No," I said. "Just consistent." That evening, I walked across the field behind the barracks, the air still carrying a trace of winter. The flag on the pole caught the last light of sunset edges glowing gold. I stood there for a moment, remembering the sound of Diane's voice behind that mic, the stunned silence that followed the ripple that became consequence. Some people thought justice was fire. I had learned it could also be ice slow, clean, and impossible to hold without getting burned. Moving into the apartment in Fayetteville felt like crossing a border. It was small but bright, a single bedroom with white walls that caught the morning light like forgiveness. I unpacked slowly each item, an inventory of survival. The shadow box went up first, the one that held my dog tags, and a photo of my unit edges frayed from sand and time. On the opposite wall, I placed the folded flag I had received when a teammate didn't make it home. It belonged there, a quiet reminder that respect is earned through what we carry, not what others say about us. The first night was silent enough to hear my own breathing. No phones buzzing, no family messages pretending normalcy, just quiet. I learned to like it. In the following weeks, I built routines again. Mornings with black coffee, evenings walking near the training fields where new recruits shouted cadence into the wind. The rhythm of their voices made me smile. I started a podcast on weekends recording with the simplest microphone I could afford. I called it Quiet Honor. It wasn't about medals or glory. It was about survival, about what it means to keep integrity when everything around you breaks. I never mentioned names or details, but I spoke about family betrayal, about how revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it means documentation and distance. Listeners began sending messages. "I've been there," one woman wrote. "You gave words to what I couldn't say." That line stayed with me. Healing wasn't loud either. It was repetition, doing one decent thing after another until peace became a habit. One afternoon, I decided to write letters. Real paper, real ink. The first went to the medevac crew who had lifted our convoy out of hell. I thanked them for hearing me through static that day, for trusting my voice when it mattered. I sent another to Rivera, thanking her for reminding me that boundaries were not cruelty, but self-respect. Then I wrote to my unit, to every name on that photo, telling them that their voices still lived in the rhythm of the radios I checked every morning. When I posted a group photo from those days on my podcast page, the comments surprised me. "Classy," someone wrote. "No anger, just grace." The word grace felt foreign but fitting. My father reached out again through email this time. The subject line was just my name. "I watched one of your podcast episodes," he wrote. "You sound at peace. I'm proud of you." I read it twice, searching for manipulation, but finding only sincerity. I typed a single word back. "Thanks." No punctuation, no emotion, just enough acknowledgement to close the loop. I didn't need his approval anymore, but it felt good to know the truth had rearranged his perspective. A few days later, I met Rivera for lunch near base. She noticed the calm before I said a word. "You look lighter," she said. "Less haunted." "That's what happens when you stop letting ghosts rent space," I replied. She smiled. "Any new battles?" "No," I said. "Just maintenance." We laughed quietly. The waitress refilled our coffees and the world felt manageable again. After lunch, I walked through a small park nearby. The air carried the scent of pine and rain, the kind that reminded me of early morning drills. A child was playing with a toy helicopter, its plastic blades whirring unevenly. I watched him for a moment, remembering the rotor sounds that once kept me awake at night. Now they just sounded like weather. The past had lost its sting. Back at home, I cleaned the apartment. The white walls had begun to feel like an extension of myself, plain steady, without decoration or apology. I sat by the window, the late light turning gold across the folded flag. There were no texts from Diane, no news about Kyle, no fresh apologies waiting in drafts. Just silence, which had finally stopped feeling like absence. It was presence now. I made a cup of tea and opened my journal. I wrote about the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge, I realized, wants witnesses. Justice just wants balance. I closed the book and turned on a soft lamp. The shadow box caught the glow, the metal tags reflecting faintly against the wall. That reflection was my proof of life. Before bed, I checked the podcast inbox. Dozens of new messages had arrived. Some were simple thank yous. Others were stories, women who'd walked away from toxic families, soldiers rebuilding lives, daughters who had learned to stop apologizing for surviving. I answered a few before closing the laptop. The last message read, "Your silence sounds like freedom." I didn't reply, but I smiled. The next morning, I woke early and stepped out onto the balcony. The town was waking up, sunlight sliding across rooftops, the faint hum of cars heading toward base. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was preparing for something. I was simply living it. A year later, the world looked different, though it hadn't changed much. November 2026 brought colder mornings and steadier hands. I was no longer Specialist Monroe. The new rank stitched above my heart read Staff Sergeant. Promotion orders came quietly delivered by email and confirmed during formation. No ceremony, just a simple handshake from the first sergeant and a few congratulations from the unit. It felt right that way, simple and earned. I'd been asked to mentor new recruits, teaching them the art of communication, not just with radios, but with composure. During one briefing, the brigade commander stopped by. After the session, he handed me a small coin engraved with the unit crest. "For clarity under pressure," he said, "and for the way you lead without noise." I turned the coin over in my palm, its edges smooth and cool. "Thank you, sir," he smiled. "Quiet leaders last longest." I kept that coin in my pocket for weeks, a reminder that strength could whisper. On Veterans Day, the command invited a small group to Arlington again, this time for mentorship recognition. I didn't expect to see her there, but fate has its own rhythm. As I stepped through the familiar gates, Diane stood by one of the benches near the reflecting pool. She looked older, the sharpness in her eyes dulled by something that might have been regret. My father wasn't with her. She approached slowly, hesitant, as though afraid I might turn away. I didn't move. The air smelled of rain on stone, the kind that settles deep into the earth. "Tessa," she said softly. I was wrong. Her voice cracked around the words, "fragile human." For a moment, I saw not the woman who mocked me, but someone exhausted by the weight of her own choices. I nodded once. "I know." That was all. No lectures, no comfort, no reconciliation script, just acknowledgement. She waited, perhaps hoping for more, but there wasn't any. I had already forgiven her in the way soldiers forgive storms. You survive them and keep walking. She glanced at the medal on my chest, the same one she had once called fake. Her eyes glistened. "You look different," she said. "You sound different." "That's what peace does," I replied. She opened her mouth again, then stopped. The silence between us was thick, but not hostile. It was simply there, an artifact of all we hadn't said. After a moment, she whispered, "I'm proud of you." I looked past her toward the flag flying at half-mast. "You should be proud of yourself when you start telling the truth," I said. Her face fell slightly, but she nodded. It wasn't cruelty. It was honesty delivered gently. She turned away first, walking slowly toward the parking lot. I watched her go until she disappeared behind the trees. Then I looked back at the rows of headstones, endless and white under the gray sky. The wind picked up, brushing through my hair, carrying the faintest echo of the anthem from a nearby speaker. I stood there still as the marble letting the quiet settle in. Peace isn't loud, it's earned. Later that evening, I returned to Fayetteville. The apartment felt smaller, but warmer somehow. The folded flag caught the last light through the window. I placed the challenge coin beside it and exhaled. The day had felt like closure, without ceremony. I brewed a cup of coffee, strong and plain, then opened my journal. The last page was waiting. I wrote one sentence: "Justice came without hate." Then I closed the cover and leaned back, letting the quiet hum of the heater fill the room. My phone buzzed once, a notification from the podcast platform. Another message from a listener. "Your story helped me walk away from people who never saw me at Red." I smiled faintly. The ripple had traveled farther than I'd imagined. Outside, the night thickened and the town lights blinked like coordinates marking safety. I thought about how far I'd come from that first dinner table where Diane called my uniform cute. I remembered the laughter, the doubt, the ambush, the silence that followed. Every insult had been an unintentional gift, shaping the discipline that carried me through. Peace was never the absence of conflict. It was the decision not to live inside it anymore. Before bed, I opened the window. The air was sharp with winter's approach. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle played taps. The notes drifted through the cold air, fragile and final. I whispered softly to no one. We made it. Then I turned off the light. The folded flag glowed faintly under the moonlight, its edges catching silver shadows. Outside, the world kept moving, but inside, everything had stopped fighting.